So there are many new and also many familiar names I see on the participant list. So just to give you a background, UXPA UK is a non-for-profit here in the UK, but we're part of a larger international organization. We've been in the UK for 17 years supporting UX practitioners. We are run entirely by volunteers. We have a focus of events, workshops, and mentoring schemes. And we also have a monthly newsletter. So if you're not signed up to that, please do so in the bottom right-hand corner of uxpa-uk.org. And our next remote event will be UX in healthcare, which is always a very popular topic, on July 16th, 2020. So this month we'll be talking about the efficiencies of design systems. We're on Twitter, so if you're also on Twitter, feel free to follow along hashtag UXPA design systems. So when I started curating this event, I started thinking about what we know about design systems, the popular design systems out there, and the common kind of constraints of design systems. So, I mean, to put it simply, we know that they're convenient design components that serve as guidelines to scale both design and development of products. But, you know, a lot has to happen under the hood before a design system is healthy enough to go out into the world and be used by everyone in your organization. So I started looking at very popular design systems. So for example, Google Material. Google says that their material design system is adaptable and it's inclusive of guidelines, components, and tools. And their goal is for those three things to support best practices for their UI design. It's an open source code, and the main fundamental goal is to streamline collaboration between designers and developers and to help teams quickly build beautiful products. So I like to lump Google Material as having a collaborative approach towards design systems. Moving on to Atlassian, very popular. I think majority of us will probably be using Jira. They say that they want to create harmonious experiences for their users, and you know they want to solve challenging interactions and then apply those solutions consistently across their product suites, and that they say that their design system has space for flexibility and they're continuously revising it. So I like to kind of group this into an emotional approach towards design systems. And then finally we have IBM, who consider their design system to be building bonds, you know, and they have a guiding ethos behind their philosophy and their principles. And they use this design system to help them distinguish every element and every experience that they design. But, you know, they're also realistic, and they say that they're very cognizant of their scale and their scope, and, you know, good design isn't their only requirement, but it's a deeper responsibility to the relationships that they create. So I like to group this as their philosophical approach. So that brings me to the common themes from these very three popular design systems out there. You know, some of them are philosophical. They talk about guidelines. They talk about flexibility. They talk about adaptability and solving challenges, scaling and scoping, and applying, using their design systems to apply solutions, and that, you know, they all really consider their design system to support their best practices. But, you know, as I started thinking a little more about it, how come no one really talks about the maintenance of the design system that they create? You know, they put all this work into it and then they, you know, put it out in the wild for everyone to use, but it's not just a one-stop shop. It has to continuously grow and be revised. And there is a maintenance factor of it because our products, our digital products are changing, trends are changing, UI components are changing. There are always new languages out there. So something else that I thought of is, what about buy-in to improve the evolution of that system that everyone works so hard on creating? And then also juggling the requirement changes of that design system that they've created. What if you have to now create a new design system to support a completely different vertical of a digital product you're creating? And then also justifying the impact that it has, right? No one really talks about that. And finally, defining the data, the insights, and the success metrics. We all love to talk about success metrics, but when it comes to design systems, no one really knows how to define that. So that brings me to our two amazing speakers who will both bring an individual way of looking at their design systems. So we have, first up is Eli Montgomery, who's the head of UX at Kazoo. He'll be talking about being the systems advocate, how to pitch and negotiate a design system. And then also will be up is Christos Kastritis, who's the product designer. He's a design systems and operations team at Deliveroo, and he'll be talking about how to understand your design system's health. So I'm going to relinquish control to Eli. One moment. Okay, and Eli, feel free to go ahead and share your screen.
Hey everyone, my name's Eli Montgomery. Tonight I want to talk to you about being your design systems advocate. And basically this is a talk focused on getting from 0 to 1 when it comes to a design system. So it's kind of the early pre-work and the infrastructure that goes into building a design system from a people and like collaboration standpoint, much more than it's about like how to do component audits or how to actually execute on it. Again, in the theme that Lena was talking about, just making sure that we understand how to like negotiate and work with stakeholders. I think that this topic is really underserved when we talk about design systems. And so I wanted to give the talk that I wish I had had when I was doing my first design system. A few things about me. I am a White House Technology Fellow with Lesbians Who Tech, 44, not 45, in case you're wondering. I am also a product leader, designer, and speaker. I've been in the UK for 2 years now. And before working at Kazoo, I've worked at Pivotal, including Pivotal Labs, and then AT&T and Amazon. You can follow me at Intentionaut on Twitter, and I am at intentionaut.io on the web. Cool, so let's dive right into it. This meme is basically me. And the reason I say that is I feel like a very strange designer when it comes to the way I think about design systems and the way I think about the work that designers do. I think a lot like a product manager. Oh, can y'all not see? Whoops. Of course. There we go. So in case you missed that, there's my first slide. Thank you, technical issues. Great. So there's that. There's some stuff about me, and then here is this meme, which basically exemplifies me. I think a lot like a product manager when it comes to being a designer, and I think the interesting thing about that is it gives me a lot of flexibility and foresight. And even though I've worked for a long time as a designer, I think like a product manager, and I think it makes me a better designer. And I also encourage it for the designers in my team. I think that the best product managers in the business think a lot like designers, and the best designers in the business think a lot like product managers. So I am always trying to cross-pollinate these ideas. And when I do talks for product management audiences, I tend to balance them more towards design and vice versa. So I want to open up with 5 quick little secrets about design systems and a bonus. So the first little secret of design systems is that it's not just a tool. It's not just a series of components, but a product, a living product. And, to get success with a design system, you need a clear picture of your investment and strategy, and you need a lot of commitment. they do take up a lot of development time and effort. And I think so often when you see these blog posts or these massive design systems that people are doing at Amazon and IBM and other places, you see so much of the results and not a whole lot of like the iceberg of negotiation and stakeholder management and vision setting that goes into it. And they really require a lot of stakeholder support. And chances are, like, whether you think about it or not, you probably have a design system. It's just maybe not what you expect. And often they are a reflection of your organization's culture. And what I mean by that is a design system is basically a Conway's Law style product that shows how your organization thinks about and manages design. And whether you have a formal system for that or not, it's kind of a mirror that you can use to see how efficient and effective and collaborative your organization is when it comes to design. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about how a design system is a product, the business of design systems, how to design or define success, how to build with, not for, when you're working with your internal teams, and then how to remember real world outcomes, which I think is so important. So looking at part one, a design system is a product. So I love this quote from Nathan Curtis, who is quoted several times in this talk, just because Nathan has done a lot of really prolific blogging and thinking and writing about design systems and how they work. And Nathan says that a style guide is an artifact of the design process, and a design system is a living, funded product with a roadmap and a backlog serving an ecosystem. That ecosystem is the one-to-many products that your company might have or be working on if you're in the digital space. The difference between a project and a product is projects deliver and die. They're set up for a short amount of time, and if you're CEO or executives are thinking that, oh, we'll just do the design system for 6 months and then, we'll move on to other things. That's not really how a design system team works. A design system is a product. It needs constant maintenance and pruning. It has to deliver and live, which means that to make it successful, you've got to think a little bit like a gardener and try to get your design system to set roots in your organization. So the way I like to define a design system is that it's a collection of practices, products, and artifacts that reveal how a company works to build digital products. And yes, the word products is in there twice, but I think the reason that's so important is because a design system is not an end in and of itself. It actually works towards a larger ideal, which is to kind of reflect back to us how we think about and do and value the way that we work as a product in and of itself. So when we talk about the structure of design systems, I looked at a bunch of different charts that kind of look like this, and I found that this is generally how we think about and talk about design systems, right? We talk about guidelines and resources. And on the guideline side, you have things like templates and modules and your components, you've got grids and typography and basically all the rules and guidelines and style guide pieces of it that help you put your design system together and kind of document how to do design at your company. And then depending on the scale of your design system, you might also have resources, right? It's not just a style guide, but code samples, snippets, maybe design tokens. In your design toolkit, you might have things like accessibility guidelines, best practices, your brand kit, which could include like your identity information, your tone of voice, your fonts and colors, and every design system is a little different. There's no one right or wrong way to do this. I know that Atlassian's design system has their tone of voice in it, whereas other companies think of tone of voice and brand as a different thing. And that's totally okay. So I've got a random poll here, sorry. So one of the things I like to think about is, the first slide that we've seen is kind of like this guidelines and resources thing is really, it represents like the UX and tech part of design systems, which I think is really important. But I think that we as designers often underserve the discussion by not focusing on this third piece, which is business. And if you don't know this diagram, this is the product management diagram put together by Martin Erickson, founder of Mind the Product. And this is his description of product management, but I think that this is really where design systems live too, right? Design systems are a UX product, but they unite UX and tech. And what I'd like to do is advocate for essentially thinking of a more holistic version of design systems that is UX, tech, and business all together. And to sell a design system, I think designers have to think like product managers, right? You can't just know the UX patterns or the style guides or the implementation side of it. You have to know how you're going to get there, what the vision is, how you're going to work with other people to sell this, and how like the UX and tech and the business all work together to achieve a bigger outcome. So that kind of leads us into talking about the business of design systems. And so there are a couple questions that you're probably going to have to ask yourself. And these are, product management style questions that you should ask and should be fairly familiar if you're doing digital design, right? What's the goal? What problems are you trying to solve? What does success look like? And how do you measure it? Who are the users? How do they work? What does their life look like? What problems are they trying to solve? What problems will we solve for them by doing this? And then who are the buyers, right? And the buyers are people internal to your organization who have an investment in maybe moving faster or developing things cheaper or increasing quality or reducing customer complaints. And starting with questions like this can be so effective and helpful for really helping you set product strategy for a design system, which again is something that I haven't found very well represented or talked about in the conversations that I see around design systems, both on Twitter and across the web. I think we tend to focus on the execution part kind of at the expense of this like product strategy piece and how to get that product strategy off the ground. So when it comes to your designer or your design system, I think that there's a couple different stakeholders, right, who are involved in this that you should be thinking of when you approach how to build essentially a system of products to help them. On the top left, we've got the organization, and that's like your product teams, the broader organization who wants to benefit from increasing the speed of experimentation, right? Can we go faster? Can we ship code that is higher quality, faster with less effort? You've got crafters. Those are your designers and developers who want to improve what gets made and how we make it. You've got your customers who never really think about your design except when it frustrates them, and your leadership who definitely want to improve costs. And if you've got really good leaders, they definitely want to improve the way that you work together. And the way that I like to think about this when you're doing kind of a stakeholder map is your organization probably has your organization probably has a lower value perception when it comes to a design system, because Janice in accounting probably does not know or care that you are working on a design system. What she does care about is the revenue, right? And your customers won't necessarily know all the work that goes into your design system. And so there's a lot of indirect benefit to your customers, right? And then on the right-hand side, we're looking at people with high value perception, and that would be your customers or your crafters and your leadership, right? So people who watch costs go down as you invest in things, and the people who make things watching their efficiency and productivity go up can perceive a lot of value. And I think that this kind of stakeholder map can help you when you're identifying who you need to talk to and how you should be talking to them, and kind of negotiating from where do they perceive value and how can you sell it to them, right? You might not always work with your finance department, but they will indirectly influence your budget through things like headcount. So it's really important to make sure that you're thinking about this broad ecosystem of stakeholders when you start selling a design system and thinking about how you're going to get people on board. one of the things that I think is really important here to remember is that you don't necessarily get buy-in in a single meeting. It is a process, right? And your customers and the people that you're working with are invested in, you know, their own success, and you have to continuously work at it. You know, the sales of a design system is a process. And I think that that is so important. And one of the things that we can do to improve our chances of success when trying to sell a design system is to really think about how you can create a shared understanding over time and really like deepen the roots of that design system by casting a vision, which kind of takes us on to the next point, which is about defining success. So one of the things that I like to think about and talk about with my design team and with the product managers I work with is, when in doubt, focus on making the cost of change clear and obvious. And so what I mean by that is, like, the cost of change is, if you had customer feedback today, how long does it take you to design a solution to that, right? Customers call in and complain that something's broken in your checkout UI or in your, you know, if you're in e-commerce, maybe it's your search and browse experience or the save or add to cart, right? How long does it take to make that change? And then can you put kind of a dollar value on that kind of thing? And that is a really good just kind of gut metric, because depending on the size of your company and your access to data, you won't always have a ton of actionable, very specific metrics. And I think hunting down those metrics can actually be an anti-pattern when it comes to how we think about positioning a design system and talking about success. So if there are common pain points or silos or ways of working that are broken, the easiest thing to do is just start calling those out and start taking note of those and where things are not easy. Because the thing about selling a design system is it's not necessarily an easy process. It's not something that you're going to do in a single meeting. You know, you're not going to get a standing round of applause and people clapping in tears because finally you have all the answers for what we've been looking for this whole time. I think it really takes a little bit of ambiguity. You know, success for a design system is not turn by turn directions, but rather a series of, you know, just checking your compass as you go. And I think that that's important to keep in mind, because design system metrics are more indicative than objective, right? Like, if you can start to talk about how you're going to reduce the cost of change or increase customer satisfaction, you might not always be able to measure those. But, you know, the question that I get asked fairly often is like, how do I know my design system is effective or doing the right thing? And I think the most important thing to remember is that, like, if you can point to indicative value, that's probably easier. And what I mean by indicative value is, I've actually got a little like breakdown on the next slide. So things like internal metrics, like throughput, i.e. how fast do we get through stories, cycle time, you know, what is from the moment we write a story through the time when it gets to development, like how long does that take? And then speed to value is from the moment we first start talking about an idea to the time where we can actually measure like a return on that investment or that value to the business. How long does that take? You can measure things through customer outcomes like conversion, CSAT, call volumes, depending on what your target is, right? Or you can look at your business strategy. Is it your OKRs? It could be a key strategy for the business, i.e. you might be trying to increase revenue by 20% or increase your profit margin by selling more attachments, for example. And then always pick something that's high visibility but medium or lower risk. If you're picking a project for your design system and you work in e-commerce, don't necessarily start with the thing that keeps the lights on, because if it breaks, then you broke it. So always start with something that's both high visibility and low to medium risk, right? So don't go after the most critical path of your application or the money maker, because that will inevitably set you up for failure if something goes wrong. And I think that this is just something to keep in mind. Do not panic It's hard. This is not easy work. It's not always straightforward, and that's okay. Just the reason I wrote this on a napkin was to remind myself that I use a system, and it's just like a little note-taking system that I call napkin math. But napkin math can really help you when you're thinking about like indicative metrics, or essentially like compass level metrics that give you direction, but not necessarily turn by turn plays, right? And so here's a little bit of napkin math, right? You can, when you think about like napkin targets, things like team productivity, which we just took a look at, plus some ballpark costs. So either average weekly salary per dev, or cost per customer call, or cost of customer acquisition. When you start to add those things together, you can either price the features as they currently are and then set a target on that. You can, set a price, like a raw dollar value or pound value, against the cost of dropout. Or you can set one against the cost of change, i.e. if your development team's really slow, for example, hey, it's currently taking us 12 weeks to ship a new feature. Every time we get started on working on a problem, you can probably say, okay, that's 40 hours a week for 8 people at a rate of, just assume 35 pounds an hour. And then you can kind of extrapolate that math on a napkin and find a target. And then even if it's not a perfect dollar value, or pound value rather, it gives you a good enough sense of how to actually start tackling that and measuring value in a quick, scrappy way, rather than focusing on getting it all right, exactly right the first time. And I think that that's so important. And the reason I think that these metrics are so key is they are vision metrics rather than exhaustive like optimization metrics. And I think what I've seen with a lot of the designers I've worked with is that they're like, okay, but how do I prove value? And I think that if you're chasing value and trying to prove it, you will end up in this place where you're always chasing where and how to prove value rather than actually just doing it. And if you want your organization to buy into your design system, what you want to do is you want to give them a yearning for solving customer problems. You want to show them, the future of productivity that's possible, rather than the very specific sorts of do it this way, do it like this, here, look at this metric that we can optimize. You want to sell people on a vision rather than a very specific sort of like set of key metrics or optimizations, because every company is different and you're going to have to learn what actually matters and what your design system is capable of over time. And once you do get started, I think that it's really, really, really important to remember that you need to build with your product teams rather than for your product teams. And what that looks like in practice is really thinking about how to include people and doing internal user research to actually solve problems for teams at scale. I said at the beginning of this talk that if you have a design process, you have a design system. It is probably dysfunctional if you work in any company that's moving at pace, and that's okay. But the fact that you have people working together to build something is what a design system is, right? Anywhere that there is enough scale that probably more than 2 teams are solving a design problem, you have a design system. It may be informal, it may be scrappy, but it is a design system. And I love this quote by Amy Thibodeau. And all my slides have like extensive notes with a ton of articles, and I'll be tweeting those out. So there's a reason to follow me on Twitter. So what roles should an effective design system play in a company? I would argue that these are the most important things: to increase efficiency, improve collaboration, become a source of truth. And also this last one that I think is actually so important, and something I've learned very, in the last 2 years of working on design systems, is they should reflect an organization's working culture and communication styles back to it. So your design system health is actually indicative of your overall collaboration health as a company, because the role of design in a company as a facilitator and customer focusing agent is actually really, really important when it comes to thinking about how to set up your design system for success. So earlier we kind of took a look at the structure of a design system. And like I said, I pulled this from a bunch of different ways that I've seen this laid out. And I would argue that if we step up a level and think about the broader context that we've been talking about tonight, the design system is actually more like this. It's a collection of practices and artifacts that reveal how we work together to build digital products. And it's got 4 parts. It's the guidelines for crafters, the resources for the organization, including your development team, the quality that's for customers, both internal and external, either through speed or anything else that is kind of those intangible benefits. And then there's the ways of working, which are for everyone. And thinking about a design system in this way, kind of as a collection of systems and a 4 big product buckets, if you will, kind of positions your design system to not just address the tangible, material, like how big should the logo be, what kind of text should we use, but also like how can the way we do design more intentionally design the company we want to be, which I think is such a powerful question when we start talking about design systems. And one of the things that I think is so important here is thinking about how we empower people to really dig in and own their work, right? I love this quote by Frank Chimero: producing tools to address the sprawl of digital technology isn't just about enabling individual contributors. It's also about creating the conditions for them to feel safe and capable in their job. And I've noticed that there's this kind of like crisis of trust around design systems. We talk about how they can limit creativity. And you'll see articles about, oh, well, if there's a design system, are those people really designing or just coloring in the lines? And I think that there's a book called Expressive Design Systems that's really, really good on this particular topic, because it's about making sure that we leave room for creativity. A design system, like I said at the beginning, is a living product. It's not something that exists in a bubble, and once you do it once, you're done. It's something that has to evolve and change and grow with your company, and it has to grow over time. So one of the ways that you'll probably have seen, but I just wanted to make a quick mention of it, is when you are trying to make people feel safe, one of the tools that we do use to kind of highlight misalignments is a UI inventory, where you can capture what are all the different ways that we solve this problem, whatever it is. You can demonstrate that misalignment visually and make problems easy to understand, but also be sensitive, because there is the company there, and depending on whether you're new or not, or if it's a new initiative, like you always want to be sensitive to those who have come before and honor that people have probably done the best they could with the information they had at the time. And so even when you do something like a UI inventory, make sure that you are respectful, because I think that goes a lot further in helping the conversation be structured for success. You're probably used to user research that looks like this. When it comes to consumer products, it's, hey, come in, sit in a lab, kind of hang out with us and talk. And as an internal product team, your design system conversations are going to look a lot more like this. Your user research is going to look a lot more like this. And it's so important to really think about how you structure conversations and set an agenda for working with internal teams to get the feedback that you need to be successful. Usability studies in a lab setting aren't the same tool that you would use for getting to a successful design system. Make sure that you build with the teams that you're working with rather than for them. So, make sure that there's a good feedback loop between either your core design system team or the approving team, or however you set it up, right? Just make sure that there's a good feedback loop and a good cadence of input and output in that system to make sure that you've got the right balance. Because product management and design are ultimately working on the conditions for good decision making, and one of the prerequisites for that is really clear understanding of user problems. And so I want to wrap up really quickly because I'm almost at time, but I just want to say, remember real world outcomes, which is another really important thing here. Real world outcomes are, things that happen outside our product, things that happen to our users, things that happen because of our products, right? And I think it's so important to remember, especially with the headlines that we see around COVID and around Black Lives Matter and police violence. The products that we build every single day have real world outcomes, and they have things that, the decisions we make in the design lab have a big impact on the way that we exist and our products exist in society. Taking ethics seriously means that we understand that what we make as a company is a direct reflection of who we are. This is a headline from this week. The CEO of GitHub wanted to back Black Lives Matter, but employees and basically the entire internet were calling for them to end their contract with Immigrations and Custom Enforcement, aka ICE in the States. And the thing is like, that's a design and business decision, but you can also see it in the way that they set up their corporate culture, in that Julie Horvath left in 2014, and she said that the working conditions were completely unacceptable. And I know GitHub's worked on becoming a very different company since those days, but it is really important to remember that there are consequences to systems that we don't always see or think of. And I think it's so important to remember that. This is actually a journey that we went on recently as a company. Is I wanted to test whether we accepted accented names, and we did not. We had a manual workaround for it, and I worked with our finance partners to say, no, we're going to accept accented names and make sure that people get correspondence in the name that suits them. And that seems like a very small design thing, but it is massive when it comes to identity and representation. And, these very small things have very large consequences. If you don't know very much about the US electoral system, which is where I'm from, this is called gerrymandering, and it's a system that is intentionally designed to limit representation and game the voting, the way that votes are counted, so that the person in charge basically maintains control. And it is really, really bad, but this is the way it works. And then just remember that a well-made system is reparative. It's something that, you may not think of a design system as more than just a small collection of tools, but that collection of tools always reflects our values. And I think it's so important to remember that and keep it in mind. I am at time, so all I'm going to say is today we learned that a design system is a product, thinking about the design or the business of design systems, how to define success, build with, not for, and to remember real world outcomes. When it comes to design systems, hard work is your best selling point. Don't understate or undersell it. I think it's so important to remember that. Thank you, Amy Hupe. And that's me. You can say hi to me at Intentional or get a resource guide to this talk on Notion or on my Twitter account. That's me.
Wow, thanks, Eli. I know a few things definitely stood out to me personally as a product manager. Making sure that design systems, you create them with your teams and not for them, is definitely something that's going to stick with me for a while. And I really enjoyed how you tied everything back into the wider scheme of systematic things. We do have a few questions,
Okay,
if you're
cool.
comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely.
So someone asked, they work for a large multi-corporate organization, but it's a very old school and old-fashioned way where they're not comfortable adopting new systems. So the question was, how do you get an organization to adopt a design system?
I think I very lightly touched on this at the beginning, but I think you focus on something that is high visibility but low risk. So you focus on something that's like not your main checkout flow, and you find the people who are willing, right? If the whole company, chances are in a big multi-corporate, I worked at AT&T, not every team was as eager to be, on the new shiny, but there were people that were. And what you want to do is find your allies. You want to find those people who believe in change and want it and can get the budget for it, right? And it's all about building alliances and finding the people who think like you do and who want what you want. So I think one of the things to remember there is just broadcast intent, right? So if you set people up to understand that you're working on this and you start saying, hey, we want to like streamline efficiency, find somebody who's willing to be a guinea pig, and that's always going to be easier. And if you can't find literally anyone who's willing to be a guinea pig, then either your positioning is wrong or you're selling it wrong. And I'd recommend like working with either some product managers or some researchers to understand your product positioning or your product strategy or what the problems are at the executive level, because it does take that level of support and sponsorship to really make sure that a design system has lasting roots and success, because it is as much cultural as it is about like who moves pixels where.
Yeah, for sure. I think buy-in in general is something that it's a hot topic and something we all struggle with in our internal organizations. So thanks for touching on that. I think we might have time for one last question and then we'll move on to Christos. I really like this one. If a design system is already light, is it better to work from the ground up or to reinforce what you have already?
That's a hard question because it depends on what's working and what isn't. You know, I think it's so much depends on what is effective about what you've already got running. If it's not effective or if it's like got limited effectiveness, depending on, you know, never keep throwing money at a problem that's on fire. I think that that's like a good hard line rule in the sand of like, if this thing's on fire and it's not working, like, and you can't save it, then don't, right? Always draw a line in the sand. If you've got like a target of like, we want to try to fix this thing in 60 days and you can't, then call it quits, nuke it and start over. Because I think it's so important to just draw a line in the sand and make sure that you're focused on getting to value, right? And having a clear picture of value will also help you determine whether you should continue investing, i.e., is this system that we currently have adopted by all the teams, or is it extremely adopted by one team, or, you know, and those are the kinds of questions that I think help with that. I see one that, can a design system exist without its technical implementation? That would be called a style guide. Technically, no.
Great. Amazing. Thank you so much. If anyone has any further questions for Eli, feel free to hit him up on Twitter. And yes, for everyone asking, we will be recording this and posting it to our YouTube channel. If you sign up to the UXPA UK newsletter, we always link all our recordings on there, as well as nice articles and general UX community
The last one.
Oh, last one.
Best time to start a design system in a startup, as soon as possible. There is no bad time to start a design system. If you build it into the way that you work, it really makes things easier to achieve scale. And if you check out the Notion page that I'm tweeting out, you will see a whole lot about like when is the best time to start a design system. But I think it's always the right time for a design system. And if you're wondering like on tooling, I've worked in both Figma and Sketch. Each has its advantages and disadvantages. There's no one right tool. I think so much of it depends on who you're working with. And it's really worth thinking about, how will my developers and my product managers access the design system? Does that make sense? Cool. Good luck.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Eli. Great. Christos, if you are ready to share your screen.
One sec. I'm in the hot seat now, huh? Okay. Think we're good? I think we're good. Can you see the screen? Yeah?
Yep.
Yeah, cool. Okay, great. So it's going to be a bit of a mashup between like a guide, case study, and just a couple of learnings that I've picked up. If you've had a design system for 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, doesn't really matter. Hopefully it should apply to everyone. All right, so hey, I'm Christos. I've been working in design systems unofficially for over 4 years now. So I've been working in enterprise and consumer products. Previously, I worked on Workday's Canvas design system. So we had a centralized team of over 20 folks in different time zones. Whereas now at Deliveroo, I'm somewhat spearheading our 2 different design systems. And definitely it's a very different setup. So you've probably read of different team models, and joining a company that already has a design system in place has a federated model where, you know, I was part of an ops team, very, very, very small ops team, and we would manage the 2 design systems, but it would be very much relying on different product teams contributing back to the system. I think I was definitely very lucky that this was already ingrained in our culture and hasn't really been a problem so far. I'm sure a lot of people who are have joined this talk and like myself have lots of questions around, how can we bring value? Like, where do you start with measuring success? How can we be effective, or how can we bring the most impact? I think all those words are kind of the same, right? But before we can answer those questions with confidence, we really kind of step back and look at the bigger picture. And I promise this is the only joke that I have in my talk. But we need to look and try and understand the health of our design system. And what I mean by health, I don't know if it's a real definition. It's just how I've coined it, is trying to establish a set of methods and measures that will give us a pulse on how we're doing. So think of it like our vitals. And in doing so, we should hopefully unearth a plethora of insights and opportunities. Why should we even do this in the first place? Companies are usually moving 500 miles an hour. It's hard to get enough time as it is. For myself, anyway, I really wanted to understand where and how we can be effective while bringing the most impact. And I really wanted, there's lots of metrics out there, but I really wanted to define the ones that would be best suited to us as a team and what the business cares about, and trying to align with the needs of the broader business is definitely something I find a bit challenging. But ultimately, the situation that I was in was I really wanted to showcase our value as a team in a language that hopefully anyone could understand. I suppose, what might success look like through understanding your design system's health? Well, hopefully you'll have some degree of establishing a set of qualitative and quantitative insights. Ideally, you'd have a roadmap that's driven by these insights. Perhaps establishing a set of baseline KPIs or statements or themes. And hopefully all these findings will lead into a future plan for the next 12, 24 months. I think at the end of it all, the kind of holy grail is increased buy-in and headcount, right? It's what we all strive for. So hopefully, by the end of this talk, you'll have a grasp on a couple of different types of measures around sentiment, adoption, time and cost, and then just a little bit of a conclusion. And again, Eli has touched on this already, but design systems are very different from business to business. So what your business cares about could be very different to another, and the design system should really follow suit. So there's no right or wrong. It's all just a big old learning curve. And so before I jump in a little bit about sentiment, what really inspired me to kind of go down this path was I was attending a Design Ops Summit last year, and Abby Covert, she shared this really interesting slide around 8 types of measures for design ops. And I felt like this really summarized what I've been seeing on the web. On the web, did people even say that? I don't know. The internet. And kind of gave me the kickstart that I needed to look at, what's my team setup, what could we realistically tackle in this time. So I definitely recommend checking out that talk. I feel like there's actually quite a lot that we can learn from design ops teams in terms of how they try and measure and demonstrate their value. But really, what sentiment is we're trying to understand how people feel when they're using our design system, right? And we can do this lots of different ways, actually. But how I found, or at least the question that I struggle with was, do you have enough insights to create a robust survey? That's generally the starting point for a lot of teams. I find they'll send out a quarterly, a biannual survey, and that's a really great place to capture it. But really, do we have enough insights to create one in the first place? And for me, joining a team that already had a design system up and running actually wasn't really the case. And so what we looked at first was trying to understand our product designers and figure out what their needs were. So we did this through a workshop. I find workshops are just so much fun. We did one called Now Next, and so we had topics at the corner of each room, the 4 corners, and we spent 5 minutes focusing on the now of things and 5 minutes focusing on the next of things. And we would have different groups at each corner. And again, at the time, our team was more ops focused, but you could structure topics to suit your design system and what you want to focus on. For me, it was around creating support and structure for great work, the function and value of design systems in the wider org, essential tools and resources for great work to happen, and ultimately the community and culture within design systems at Deliveroo. I guess whatever topics you decide on, it's really trying to ensure that those topics reflect that your potential areas of focus, and really they should kind of be areas you want to get a pulse on. I feel that actually sounds really obvious, but I feel like I had included it anyway. And so we gave designers different numbers, and so they were rotating around different corners of the room and interacting with different people throughout. And they would put post-its, have a great old chat. And we would do afterwards, we did a bit of affinity mapping, and we kind of clustered these post-its from these different topics together. And what we ended up getting was a set of high-level teams and different opportunities that arose from those. So the things that were in white were something that we were hearing repeatedly, stuff around having a studio space, maybe around conference budgets, learning opportunities. Within design systems, it was mostly around documentation, having how-tos, having good examples, different types of automation, toolkit improvements, stuff like that. And so that ended up being, my area of focus for the next couple of months. So a couple of months passed, and I always find when you join a new company, it definitely takes a while to get up to speed and understanding how their system or just how those product teams work. And it was kind of at this point, there's definitely lots of feedback floating around, or lots of opinions. And there was certainly a gap in my understanding of how engineers felt. And the best way that I found to tackle this was through doing a set of user interviews. And I find that user interviews, they're a really great opportunity to speak with people that you may have not connected with before. You can definitely get a much richer set of insights in comparison to a water cooler chat. And so really, I guess the hard thing with interviews is, thinking about what questions you'd like to ask. And I suppose, what would you like to learn? And are there any gaps in your understanding? For myself, I really wanted to focus on trying to understand their usage or their adoption of our design systems. Was there any parts, particular parts of the workflow that they were using in comparison to others? Was it their first time using a design system, or have they used design systems in other companies? I think another really important part is trying to understand their collaborative process with designers. And one thing I've definitely learned is that it can be completely different within product teams, even in your own company. And so totally recommend trying to collaborate with a researcher and putting together some form of a script, just so you don't start waffling like I always do. And I won't go into what kind of question or a lot of the questions that I asked, but the questions that I found the most interesting in terms of their response was around, when was the last time you used something from our design system? What was it? Could you walk us through it? I personally found that, at least with the engineers that I interviewed, they were much more open with showing rather than saying. And I found that gave me some really interesting insight into their workflow with using our design system. could you share with me a story of, when you struggled or had an issue with using our design systems, and how might you solve that problem? I think for me, this was especially important given our team size. It was essentially just kind of myself and one engineer, and having them think out loud of how they would solve that problem can definitely give you some insight into their thought process. If you're stuck on certain questions, Brad Frost, the man, the legend, he has a very good blog post on how to construct design system questions. And there's a ton of stuff here that I wish I had found before I did it myself. But that's a really good starting point. There's definitely a lot of learnings from doing this. And I think if I had to pick 3 pointers, I would say that definitely ensure you have a strong mix of participants. Again, for myself, I was doing interviews with just engineers, but you could be doing with several types of disciplines. But for me, I really wanted to make sure that I was including engineers across different platforms, because we have design systems that cover iOS, Android, and web. I wanted to make sure that we had engineers with different levels of tenure. So engineers who had been here for 6 months versus 2 years. And also just like different levels of experience, which we can kind of capture through a screener. I find that gives us a really strong sample. And that ensures that, we're not missing out on any bits of feedback. In terms of scripts, it's okay not to stick to it, Scripts are there to go with the flow. It's absolutely fine to traverse down a different path depending on what you're talking about. And I find that really allows you to unearth lots more insights that you might not have found otherwise. And so think of it more as of a guide than anything else. Another thing that I found useful was, when analyzing these findings, so basically we didn't have a dedicated researcher for this project. So essentially I had to take a bunch of recordings, get them transcribed. And essentially what I did was, just pull in everything that you find interesting, any sort of quotes, just pull them into a big, massive spreadsheet. I think this was maybe a quarter of what I had initially pulled in, and slowly start to kind of group them, right? And we're starting to get some like really detailed findings, and then group them again. This time we're getting closer to, a set of high-level findings with teams within each one. And from there, we can take those individual teams and define a set of opportunities for each of those. We can think about what groups might be affected, the potential impact, who might own that opportunity, what kind of short, medium, and long-term actions can arise from that. And I'm not saying that, we can definitely tackle all these opportunities right now, but it's more so to have it there in our back pocket, right? Some things we just can't tackle with our team size, and that's fine. And so now we're at the point where we have a set of teams from our designers, a set of teams from our engineers, and we're actually starting to see a little bit of overlap when it comes to culture and community, Figma, and ways of working. So some of the things with engineers where they weren't very familiar with Figma in terms of best practices. There was something called multi-line text, which I'll talk about later on. It came up quite a lot. There's definitely a lot in terms of new hires. So anyone new who joined the company wasn't really aware of design systems, and then weren't really sure on how to get the most of it. And so from those workshops and interviews, we have a set of teams, we have a set of opportunities that we can tackle. So some of the things that we were able to tackle within that quarter was, introducing an onboarding session or a design systems 101 session for anyone in tech org who joined the company, so that anyone new who joined, within their first week, they know what design systems is, they know how to use it, and they know what value it brings to the business. And then a bunch of other things around, introducing onboarding sessions for our designers, our content designers, a rechange into how we communicate updates, and then a couple other tooling enhancements around, introducing guidelines and platform availabilities within the component descriptions, introducing auto layout, which can speed up designs by 250%. Don't quote me on that, okay? Don't quote me on that. That's just what I've done. And also, mapping out our Figma and component library inconsistencies, which is something that you might run into as you're building and definitely maintaining a design system. I'm just going to have some water. And I forgot to stick the timer on, so I'm not sure how far I've gone time-wise.
But 10 minutes?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sure. We'll give it a go. So really, the holy grail in terms of sentiment is, creating a baseline survey, something that we can use on a recurring basis, right? Why I really wanted to do this, I wanted to see, if there was any similarity between this and the previous rounds of research in terms of feedback. We had a certain percentage of turnover. We had a lot of new initiatives that we'd introduced. So I really wanted to, track over time how these perceptions change. And hopefully that would allow us to kind of better prioritize our focus areas or our KPIs. But really just to branch out and include as many designers and engineers as possible, right? So the interviews focused on a smaller set of engineers, but now we wanted to include everyone. We already have a lot of insights, but now we're at the point where we really want to merge these teams from designers and engineers into this baseline survey and capture that progress that's been made. And we really want to make these insights quantifiable in a language that really our stakeholders, or really, anyone can understand. And so I set up a survey in Google Forms. Google Forms is really, really good because you can export that into a spreadsheet, and that saves a lot of heavy lifting. In terms of surveys, we focused on the usual, strongly disagree, strongly agree, ratings from 1 to 7. And I also introduced a grading scale, the ECTS one, I think. You don't have to do this. I just found this a lot easier in terms of extrapolating that data and trying to make more sense of it. And so based on the insights that we had gathered and from the teams, we were able to establish a set of KPIs around quality, speed, comms, completeness, contributing, and confidence. There's a lot of C's in there, actually, isn't there? A lot of C's. I won't go too deep on these, but let's look at 2 examples. So confidence, we would give each participant a statement. So for confidence, it was, I feel confident in using our design systems. And so to me, people should feel they are armed with the right information and are getting the most out of our design systems. And I kind of feel that the word confidence captured this really well. I know from previous insight that there are a lot of uncertainties around many things, which is a little bit more common in a federated model, at least from what I've seen. And so it's kind of imperative to really include this and monitor it going forward. Completeness, availability. So I find myself using something that is outside of our design systems. This was, one of our main insights is around the disparity that we were seeing between what is available in our design toolkits versus our code-based component libraries. And so this is another opportunity to validate that even further. And so a couple pointers. Definitely run your questions by several disciplines. What might sound normal to us could sound completely alien to others. I'm totally guilty of this, so definitely recommend that. Think about what metric you wish to communicate with your audience in a language that they understand. So for me, does 6.3 out of 5 make sense to everyone? Does a percent make sense? I ended up deciding on a grading scale, so I felt like, A, B, C, D is something that anyone within the business, particularly our stakeholders, could understand. And definitely leave space for extra feedback as optional. Folks who are really invested in design systems will give the extra 15, 20 minutes to give feedback. But for those who want to do it in 5 minutes or less, having that optional is definitely, doesn't become a blocker and kind of ensures that anyone who is going to fill out that survey will actually do it, because response rates are never good these days. I found it was really useful to separate the analysis of designers and engineers into separate streams, at least at the analysis part. They use the system in different ways, and our level of understanding between engineers and designers were actually quite different. And so separating that out, if we could get a better idea of how effective we were doing. And so we were able to take, this funky spreadsheet, different graphs, getting a snapshot of what our engineers were feeling, what our designers were feeling, and putting this essentially into a big, massive report. That's the best way I found to analyze it. Think about your KPIs, give rationale behind those KPIs, have graphs separating designers and engineers, including the quotes from the survey, including like the rating and their tenure. You know, what are the opportunities? What does this all signal? And then the grade itself. And I found all that was just really helpful in arming, you know, myself with the right information so I could communicate that with everyone else. So what did we really learn? Well, we were able to get all of this insight, all this kind of deep wealth of knowledge down to a little report card. And sometimes this can feel a little bit disheartening because, design or trying to create, maintain, and evolve design is really, really hard. Same for systems too. But I think it's worth reminding ourselves that now we have a lot of insights and we have identified a lot of opportunities. So we can definitely be a little bit more positive in trying to improve upon these KPIs, right? And so yeah, we're end up with a lot of insights and a lot of opportunities. So that's all the sentiment stuff. Let's get into some fun things around adoption and time and cost. And again, we had a very small team, so it was very hard to pull certain metrics around adoption, but it's generally one of the more common metrics used in design systems. And for us, I really wanted to get, again, just like a base or a pulse on how we're doing. And so what better place to start than UI coverage? And this can cover particular things like, trying to understand, the percentage of applications that are using our design systems. So, I mean, this might not apply to everyone, but at Deliveroo, we have quite a lot of internal tools and like a couple of consumer products as well. So this gives us a sense on which applications aren't using our design system yet. And we can collaborate with those and try and migrate that over. Or even better, to chat and understand what problems that they are experiencing and how we can kind of help that. And so for myself, we were able to see, in terms of adoption, that our tool design system was covered by 95%, and our product design system had about 83% coverage. So with tools design system, we had over 40 applications or 40 internal tools. Now, I'm aware that I'm also quite lucky in that adoption is usually one of the harder things to nail, right? And what I found worked well for us was we basically had a thing called the Create React template, and anyone in the company would use that when they were starting to create a new application, because you can do it in under 5 minutes. And what we did was we bundled the component library, or the design system, whatever you want to, into that application. So that definitely helped a lot in terms of adoption and not having someone go off using some crazy bootstrap. We can also look at the percentage parity between our Figma toolkits and our code-based component libraries. So again, I wanted to figure out, just how much components have actually been built. And in this federated model, you're going to get funky results. And so we can put some formulas together, and we can see that, in terms of what we had in Figma, we were only seeing 40% of that in our iOS component library, whereas our tool design system was at 85%. So again, we're starting to get more sources of data that's validating what we've been hearing. And this can only do us good when we're trying to make a case for headcount or particular future. There's also some really interesting stuff that we can do on the design tooling side. So if you have Figma, or if you're on an org plan, they have library analytics. We can look at the number of component inserts, and we can get a snapshot of the different teams and how much they are using our design system components, and we can see if does that percentage match with our expectation. But we can actually go another level deeper with component inserts, and we can use it to define the default option of a component within Figma. So say this is a really simple example, okay? This is a row component. Before, I had separate components for a 2-line and a 1-line. Now, I was merging these into just one component because I was fixing a multi-line issue that I've been hearing over and over again. And so one question I was asking was, well, what should that default option be? And these are all little things that we can do to improve for removing friction within our toolkit. And so I was able to go in and have a look and see the number of inputs for those components. So I can see that the 1-line for our row had over 6,000 inserts, whereas our 2-line had less than 1,000. That's, that's over 760%. And that was seen across our library. And so doing little things like this can make us a bit more confident in building the right stuff and trying to remove that friction. And I could also validate this further by looking at number of component detaches. So we can see at a snapshot what components are being detached, how much. And what was interesting was 7 out of 8 of my most detached components were all related to that multi-line text issue that I mentioned before and that had come up in research. Further validating the problem, further giving us a need to go and fix that. And it was quite a nice feeling being able to do that. We can also look a little bit into time and cost, which definitely is the hardest one of the three for me anyway. And why I personally find this really difficult is that, in the midst of creating a design system, tracking maybe, well, it depends what company you're in. If you have really good project management tools, kudos. I was not dealt that hand. Tracking how much time we've spent designing and building components is definitely often a foresight, and there can be lots of backtracking involved. And there's lots of ways to capture time. But really what I was trying to think of, what could drive my team change, what could increase buy-in across our execs and our orgs. And so for me, it was trying to understand our business and what metrics they use to communicate certain value. And personally, I think that time savings are, again, universally understood within a business, and it allows us to speak the same language as our stakeholders, right? Really, for me anyway, framing the overall success of our design system is what our stakeholders care about the most, and time is a really great example of doing that. Sorry for the wall of text, guys. We're almost done. And so since I didn't have a set of numbers of how much time we would spend making certain components, the only kind of other option I had was minimum time estimates, right? So by minimum time estimates, I mean we could only focus on the minimum amount of time it would take to build the component from an engineering standpoint. So we're removing a ton of variables here that are just way, way harder to measure, like design QA, code reviews, acceptability checks. We're just focusing on just how quick can we build this thing. And while that number will be smaller, it's a more reliable number, right? We're removing a lot of ambiguity, and we're slowly, we're slowly building trust with our stakeholders and other parts of the business. And so, again, we can now get a set of current savings and maybe even projected savings. And so, what I did personally, and this might not work for you, but for me, I gathered like a smaller set of trusted engineers and designers, and they gave their estimates of building components in days, which is one of the more widely discussed metrics at Deliveroo. So normally you might hear engineering hours or engineering days. That's kind of what I've heard a lot, but might be different for your business. And then we also focused on a core list of components. So not everything, just the components that we felt will be required to create an MVP. And so then I also mapped the number of applications that were using all of these components, which I really don't recommend. It's time consuming, but fun. So we put together a little survey, and what did we learn? Well, I can't show you the actual results, but essentially I put together a massive table of all of our components, the different platforms, and the time spent on each of those, things around the cost, total time, and we're able to map that back to the number of applications that are using that component, and then we can get a sense of just how much time we've saved overall. And so if you have Notion, I do have a template if you want to try it out. And so I'll show you some examples that we were able to get from this exercise. And so we were able to get a snapshot of the minimum ROI. We could see that for tools, we saved 308 days of engineering time and 160,000 pounds, which is quite nice. It's worth noting that this is minimum stuff as well. So the number is probably a lot higher, but it's a good starting point, right? We're getting something together. The same can apply if we were creating a new app. So we can see roughly how much engineering time we would save. So say there was a new product being put together with one engineer, one designer, we've saved that engineer 16 work weeks. We've saved that designer 3.5 work weeks. So those are numbers and metrics that anyone can really understand. And we can do the same thing at a component level. So we can see that our buttons within our tool design system was used across 18 apps. And roughly we've saved the business 85 days of engineering time and 25 days design time. And the same for cards. It's used in 22 apps, 42 engineering days, 63 design days, and time that we've saved overall. And so we're slowly kind of building up the value of our design system. Don't worry, I'm almost finished. So what's all this signaling? What's all the things that I'm putting together? What does it all signal? For me, we're having a high percentage within our tool design system, which is no surprise given the amount of time and cost that we've saved so far. And the lower numbers that we're seeing again on Android and iOS is like further validating this lack of parity that I've been hearing through insights and through the survey, which is, I mean, it's bad, but it's great for us because now we have 3 different sources of data to prove it and to validate it. And let's not forget tooling as well, right? We can do actually a lot of stuff within the tool itself, and these all build up, right? We can reduce the number of instances of a component. Say like myself, I reduced a system banner from 22 variations or instances to just 1. We can introduce auto layout to speed up, templates and designs by around 250%. We can combine that with our internal data plugin that we have at Deliveroo, and we can look at building certain screens up to 1250% faster. So something that, say like our menu page that might have taken an hour to build, a basic menu, we can do that in 5 minutes. And little things like removing multi-line text that can speed up, resizing components by around 50%. So again, lots of little things, but it's all building up. What's I supposed to say here? So the question or the takeaway for you guys is how can you align better with your business's goals? And so what do they really care about? And try to focus on those numbers. Your business might care more about performance. So from a design system point of view, you may be able to look into like server costs and a couple of different things like that. But really, to conclude, what we're left with all of this is we have a large set of data from our users that's both qualitative and quantitative. We have high level insight into adoption and ROI, and we have a much clearer set of opportunities that we can fit into our roadmap, right? For me, what it signaled was that, again, we didn't really do a good job of investing in dedicated engineering support, and that meant that our design system had suffered more on the engineering side. But now we have lots of sources of data, and we can use that to focus on improving engineering efficiencies and getting that higher count. And so at the end of all this, I was able to put together a really detailed doc that would kind of summarize the problems that we were facing, the data that validates those problems, and our plan for the next 18 months, and the people we really need to get there. And so we'd surface this up to our CTO. Everything was all good, and then COVID happened and ruined everything. Could be worse though, could be worse. Now our opportunities were better aligned with the business. So we were able to take into account KPIs, engineering principles, company values, and also their 2020 ambitions, further adding weight to the work that we are doing. And, ultimately we're ended up with an improved roadmap that's backed by all these insights and data that has defined focus areas and KPIs and engineering principles and a bunch of that stuff. I could have gone into a lot more detail. I have a blog post on this. If you go onto Deliveroo's Medium page, there's a bunch of stuff there. And yeah, feel free to send me an old tweet or just leave a question here if that's okay. Hopefully I didn't bore everyone. There's a lot of talking.
No, thank you so much, Christos.
The pleasure is mine.
Yeah, of course. I really appreciate the level of detail you went into, especially when you were talking about understanding your own design system. And I thought it's great advice that you focused on the overall themes and then you were able to cluster them. I think that allows you to dig deeper into the existing design system and understand, the really nitty-gritty stuff of it. I think cluster analysis always is just a great way to get to the motions of things. So that's really refreshing. And it's also great probably for your engineers and designers too, to see that you're really listening to understand what they're thinking of it.
What I definitely found was doing a lot of this built a lot of trust with our engineers, and it helped that, at our weekly or bi-weekly Android or iOS or web catch-up sessions, we definitely noticed an increase in attendance, and people were definitely a lot more involved once they were being heard, right? That's the main thing. People like being listened to. And
Right. That's
that's one
amazing.
takeaway I took.
I also really liked how you spoke about metrics, because I thought that aligned really well to what Eli was saying, which translated really well, because he said, try to translate your metrics into what Jane the accountant would understand. So I thought those examples are definitely very helpful, and they paralleled really well. Thank you. So I think we have a few questions. Someone has asked, what tools do you use for your design system? From that research that you conducted, did you end up introducing new tools to the teams, and what was preferred by developers?
What tools do we use in our design system? For web, we use React, but our component library is in a custom version of Storybook. This was made about 2 years ago. Storybook is definitely way better now, so we're kind of in a bit of a rut when it comes to that. Where's that question gone again? Sorry. Oh, okay. Did we introduce new tools? We actually haven't gotten massively to that point yet. There's definitely tools that we're looking at. One of the big things is around design QA. So we've been looking at tools like Chromatic, which does visual regression testing, so we can integrate that in with through GitHub and stuff. So that's one thing we're really looking at. From the design tooling side, we've introduced 2 new Figma plugins. So we have a plugin on pulling in live data into our design. So things like menu images, food, there's a lot of stuff there that does take a lot of manual time. And so we're definitely speeding up the process there. There's also another plugin we're looking at around content and things. So Deliveroo was, kind of still is, very big on the content side of things. So rather than say like a UX writer or a content strategist, we have content designers. So I find they're much more embedded in the workflow. And so we've been including a plugin that helps automate all that, rather than relying on a style guide or a tone and voice page. Why not try and embed that as an actual tool? So that's something that we've been doing so far. What was preferred by developers? I'm not sure if you mean by the design system overall from the research I've done, or do you mean particular tools? Feel free to tweet me that again, maybe with a bit more context, and I'm happy to answer.
Cool. There's a few other questions. I don't know if you just want to scroll through.
Oh, yeah, let's have a look. Do you have experiences transitioning from a sketch library to a Figma library? I fortunately do not, because I know that can be a nightmare. There is a lot of really good articles out there though that have documented their experience of migrating. It's a really hot topic right now. There's a lot of teams moving to Figma. Figma is just god tier when it comes to design tools for now. I just love that with Figma. It's a lot more collaborative with your product teams. With Sketch, you don't want people jumping into your files because you're getting conflicts everywhere. Whereas with Figma, you can have product managers, developers, everyone just jumping in the file at the same time. And I find it's much more collaborative in that sense.
Eli's agreeing with you. He says Figma in all caps.
My man, yeah, Figma for life. When you separate into web tools and web product, what are the major differences? Oh yes, sorry, I didn't really explain that. So we have separate design systems for internal tools. That's like lots of different scrappy tools that are built. And then product is more like our consumer facing stuff, like our food delivery app, our rider app, or our restaurant's tablet that they use to accept food. Whether that's the right thing is another conversation. How far apart do you tend to design from iOS to Android? Is going native worth it in the long run? I think this question means I personally try to rely on as much of the OS's native patterns as much as possible. I have seen folks use React Native in the past, which, I mean, I guess you're making things visually consistent, or more consistent maybe, across the 2 platforms, but you are getting a lot of extra overhead, and there's a lot of things that you no longer get for free that using native patterns do. I hope that answers your question. Would you recommend to start from, where do you recommend to start from in terms of creating a research plan for verifying design system components? I'm not sure what you mean by verifying. Do you mean like creating a new component and validating that that component meets the needs of its users? If so, that depending on your team size, that might be more reliant on or might be more responsible for the product team, or if you have a large team, maybe yourself. I'm not sure if that really answers your question. How do you deal with products teams? Teaming. Yeah, teaming's hard, right? Teaming is hard, especially on Android. It can be a little bit funkier when trying to support older versions. So we're actually doing a lot of teaming right now. So at Deliveroo, we have like our standard consumer team. We're also introducing an A+ team. So anyone who's on our subscription service, we have dark mode on the Writer app, and we're also looking at a couple of other different options. Teaming is quite hard. If you don't have a set of centralized design tokens that are semantic based, so like two-tiered, so you have system level colors, product level colors. If you have those product level colors in place, so that's like instead of saying your text is teal 500, it's using a variable of text.primary or text.color primary instead. I hope that answers your question. I like answering these questions. This is fun. How do you deal with product-specific components? Oh, that's a great question. So it's taken me a while to understand, at least at Deliveroo, like what's really design system versus, or what's owned by product versus what's owned by the design system, because there is a lot more overlap, I find. I personally think like if it's a product-specific component, as long as it's using the foundational elements like color, type, if it's referencing those tokens, it's good to go. If it solves a specific user problem that our existing components don't, I think that's perfectly fine. I think the problem with what I've seen is having a product specific component being promoted back to the design system can actually be quite a lot of overhead, because that component is built using a very specific prop name. So it might be like restaurant title or restaurant subtitle, whereas in reality it should be, title, subtitle, a lot more agnostic. And I find there could be definitely some problems with that. Does your engineering team manually rewrite design components, buttons made in Figma to Storybook? If so, how do you maintain updates to the design system? God, there's a lot of questions. This is great. I'll just answer one.
I think we have time for maybe one or two more, and then I think it'll be wrap up. But feel free to pick and choose which ones.
Yeah, guys, folks, if I don't answer your question, please feel free to DM me on Twitter. I love these. This is great fun. Yes, they do manually. I guess they have to recreate the components themselves, because it's in a totally different system. I mean, a lot of the like core components like buttons and like headers and stuff are never really changed that much, if at all, at least for a couple years, unless there's certain edge cases. So I find maintaining those isn't necessarily a problem. I think the main thing is having them referencing a set of design tokens that's semantic is just a lot more scalable. Okay, I have to pick one more. How would you go about dissecting a design system to start designing in dark modes? Ooh, I have no idea. I wish the engineer that worked on dark mode could give me that answer. Okay, wait, these are really small ones. Have you ever worked on a system that covers progressive web apps? These are components. If so, would you treat them differently from web components? I don't have as much experience in that, so I can't give you a proper answer. I'm sorry. What kind of KPIs do you tend to measure to help with buy-in? So, sorry. This is what happens when I move a little bit away from my mic. What kind of KPIs do you tend to measure to help with buy-in? So the things that I mentioned around quality and speed and completeness, those are all KPIs that I use, and those grades kind of reflect that. The same applies to time. So, like percentage of adoption and stuff like that. And those are on my article if you want to check those out. Okay. I'm sure you all are sick of me talking, Jesus. So a lot of talking for one Irish person.
Thank you, Christos. Great. So I think that is an official wrap to the efficiencies of design systems. I want to thank everyone who's been able to join. I think we have people from the UK, from Europe. We have a couple of people from the US, some people from Canada, some people from Asia. Amazing what remote events can do. Usually it's just a bunch of people in central London in a room with a couple of beers. So it's fantastic that we have this sort of outreach now. So just a big thanks to Eli and to Christos for their time and their effort. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to email me at lena@uxpa-uk.org and I'll be glad to help you out. Otherwise, hope to see you for UX and healthcare on July 16th. Have a great evening, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.